Our next guest made my job so easy as I just needed to ask her one question and she was off with the most incredible advice. If you're looking to nail your skills at being a successful AE, then this episode is for you, as Sarah Lapin, Senior AE at Salesforce, knows a thing or two about it. Women in Sales Awards finalist, Sarah and I go back to basics, chatting about the evolution of behaviours, how to be an effective researcher, and becoming a trusted advisor. This conversation is jam-packed with actionable takeaways on how to be a top performer and succeed in sales. Let's get into it. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem, and thank you. It's an absolute honour to be here.
You have won quite a few awards I've seen recently. So if anybody at home listening wants to understand why they should trust Sarah, hopefully that is the reason, because you know what you're doing. And I think one of the reasons why we really want to talk about going back to basics today and stripping it all back is because of the ever-changing sales landscape. So I think that's a really good place to start. Let's just talk a little bit about what has happened to that landscape.
Yeah, I think the only kind of consistent thing about sales is the pace of change. It is constantly evolving. And whether that's year over year, you've got a new set of accounts or a new industry or a new patch that you're trying to target, or kind of more broadly, the kind of obvious thing that I think around is the macroeconomic headwinds that have been impacting most of us. Selling in a downturn was certainly kind of uncharted territory for me, and it really hit me like a perfect storm. So just to provide a bit of context to that, at the beginning of last year, I took on a new role where we were essentially tasked with building out a new industry vertical for high tech. And the first kind of quarter of the year, it took quite a lot of kind of extra thought to really kind of think around the different positioning of what I sell, which is Marketing Cloud, through a B2B context versus B2C, which is how I'd used to have been positioning it. And what we didn't kind of foresee at the time was that the tech downturn was about to hit. So we'd started really honing in on the high tech industry, and we started to feel customers were becoming much more reticent to buy. Consumer confidence was kind of really feeling like it was declining. And then, of course, we started seeing layoffs taking off, both within Salesforce and within my direct customer base. And it's been really interesting to see kind of how people have or have not shifted or adapted. There's some sellers that I've kind of seen which have almost fallen into a bit of a blame or a pity culture, sort of saying, my customer's not going to buy right now, there's no budget. It like just kind of not feeling sorry for themselves, but just kind of giving in to the situation.
Well, it's tough. It's hard to stay positive, isn't it?
It really, really is. And then on the flip side of that, there are AEs that have really adapted to their new normal. And whether that is really kind of focusing on the long game and just focusing on relationships and building those relationships again with their customers, because they know that when we get out of this, they're going to be well positioned to help. Or on the flip side, and what I think is really important and what it's forced a lot of us to do is going back to basics. And I think there's so much kind of focus on really understanding your customer's business and understanding their landscape so you can really kind of help them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. I think the other kind of part of a changing landscape is we as sellers have had to adapt to a new age of buyers. There is no denying that buyers are always a little bit skeptical of sellers. We've always had a stigma with our sales profession as a whole. And I think throughout the last kind of 5 to 10 years, there's been a fundamental shift in terms of how B2B buyers actually want to buy. And I think that has really been kind of accelerated by the pandemic. We all became accustomed to working from home. As buyers ourselves, we've all experienced these B2B kind of Amazon-like self-serve experiences where we can go and find information online, and it becomes really seamless with the digital tools that we've got in place. And there is so much interesting research out there on the future of sales. There was one stat from Gartner that really kind of sat with me, and it's that only 17% of a B2B buyer's time is actually spent with a sales rep during the cycle.
Wow.
So to me, what that really means is that as sellers, every single interaction that we have with a customer, and that's before we even meet them, is more important now than it ever has been before. And that's kind of why the theme of going back to basics has been so important to me.
And I think also the buyer needs to really understand who they're speaking to, because with that 83% that they're not spending with the seller, they need to understand that they can trust who they're speaking to. So that is where the power of LinkedIn and your presence, and whether you are an expert in your field and whether you're going to really add that value, which we'll get into, is so important. You frame this so well, and I've already just learned so much from you, so I'm really excited to get into this. So let's start with the research, because I think that is really, really important when we're talking about understanding our buyer, making sure that we're creating that personalized approach, that they're really seeing the value from us. So how would you map out an account, and what research would you do to really get to the grips of understanding that buyer?
So I think at a broad level, it's all around becoming a student of your customer's business and starting to kind of understand as much as you can about their industry, their current state, their landscape, so that you can start to navigate their world more effectively. Then in terms of how I specifically kind of identify my target set of accounts, I've got a slightly unique role in the sense that I've got 2 strategic accounts. I've got a few enterprise and a few mid-market. So at the beginning of the year, I always go through almost a bit of a tiering process. And I call it my upside down pyramid, because when people will typically kind of break their, do their kind of segmentation, they're like, okay, my top accounts are at the top of the pyramid, and then we'll go down and all my white space is at the bottom. And I'm like, no, flip that on its head. At the very top is where you want to be spending most of your time. It's like, that's where you're going really wide and deep in your accounts. And then as you kind of go through the funnel, that's where you're spending less time, and you might be using your BDR to kind of help get into some of the lower accounts. But I think it's all about identifying, particularly in this landscape, who you've identified potentially has a still need that you can meet. So they fall within your ideal customer profile. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, in B2B, my ideal customer profile is very different to what I was selling when I was selling B2C.
Yeah, of course.
So it's really understanding your product market fit to the different industries and the different personas. So I typically sell to CMOs. So what's important to them? And once you've kind of found those top kind of accounts, and you know that they're going to be your focus accounts for the year ahead. And of course, it will shift as you go through. There will be some that maybe it's not the right time and you then need to kind of pivot. But the general process that I will follow is start in like very macro with their industry landscape. So what are the industry opportunities and threats that are impacting them at the moment? What's their total addressable market? Like, is there a growth opportunity? Like, what I position is very aligned to kind of growth and how we can help grow customers. And then it's going that kind of next layer deeper to the company. So what's their web experience like? Annual report. Like, I don't think enough people really get into customers' annual reports. And there is so much goodness that you can find within that. It can be a half a day or a day read, and you can get a really good perception of what that business is trying to achieve. I think my top tips are read the message to shareholders carefully, and a bit skeptically as well, to find out how the company has performed. Where does the management team want to take the company, and what is their strategy to get there? I'm looking for things like, look, are they acquiring? Are they looking to grow? Are they disbanding companies? I'm working with a business at the moment that's super interesting. They're bringing 2 of their biggest entities together to form one newer business. So they've got an end-to-end offering. But actually what they're really interested in is how they can reduce cost and how they can optimize their business to support all of that change. And again, going back to high tech, sometimes it's that they want to unlock new revenue streams like subscription management, which is a whole new different way of thinking that they might not be geared up to. So going back to the trusted advisor, I've helped a company there before. And at this point, it's just starting to think around those different corporate level initiatives and starting to map where you think your company can help them. And that's kind of the very beginning of it. I think once you've got that kind of holistic understanding of the customer and where they want to go, a really interesting thing, and I only clocked onto this recently, is job ads. When companies are hiring, they're typically hiring for a pain that they're trying to solve for.
Interesting.
So you can find so much brilliant information inside out. So you're not outside in at the moment. This is what the customer is going out, and it's going to be slightly, they're not going to be sharing all of what's important to them. But for a good example, I follow the CMOs of all of my top prospects on LinkedIn. one of them the other day posted 3 job ads in succession around growth marketing. And in each of those job ads, they were talking around acquisition, retention, monetization of their users. So already I can glean from that job ad alone that that's what they're focused on. And it could be that they've got a challenge around that today and that's what they need to help solving it. Or it could be that they've got a big growth initiative that this CMO is tasked with. And again, it's just finding those little hooks that you're like, okay, this is what they might care about. You don't know this at this stage. This is just building out that initial hypothesis. And again, you can get great nuggets of like their tech. Like they'll often be like, within this job ad explicitly, they said, we are looking for new vendors. And I'm like, right, great, get in there. So there's so much useful information that you can find, even like customer reviews to get a view in terms of what customers think around them. I do a huge amount of research profiling execs. I think go beyond LinkedIn. There are so many account executives that before a meeting, they'll be in their Uber and they'll like quickly look on the customer's LinkedIn profile and they'll think they'll get a picture of who they are.
Yeah.
There is so much more that you can do to really try and understand what they care about directly from them.
Like
so
knowing what university that they went to probably isn't enough.
Yeah.
You need to go a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I get the human level. Like you are wanting to find, and often someone will say, I'm into the outdoors or I'm into exercise, and that's great. Like I love hiking. Maybe we can talk about that in our first conversation because we're a human at the end of the day and we want to find that. But I think when you go beyond LinkedIn, just Google their name. More often than not, on YouTube or on Spotify or on one of the outlets out there, you will find an interview where they have been interviewed. You can see thought leadership, maybe they've authored. Again, you can start finding things that are important to them. I follow a CMO at the moment where ABM is really top of mind and he talks about it a lot, really kind of outwardly. And it's, again, I can start to build out a perspective in terms of what are the topics that are interesting to them? What does he care about? Another one, the CEO of a company that I'm following, he, on the first 5 minutes of an interview, kind of started saying around his challenges around becoming a net zero company. We are at Salesforce a net zero company. So how can I start to think around executive mapping, which is another thing. I think a lot of AEs are brilliant at bringing executives into their meetings, but they often do it quite late down the line. But actually kind of at the very beginning of the process, it's starting to map, okay, these are the execs that are important to me and who I care about. What is a good way in? Because I don't think necessarily Sarah Lapin, the account executive, going right to the CEO works. Actually,
you can try. Girl can dream, go for it.
But what I find most powerful is actually when, if I can find a link and not necessarily related to what we're trying to do, but something that is important to that person and that we can actually help them with, is I invest in warm introductions based on people that I know or our leadership. Yeah. So much more than trying to kind of do the outreach myself. And I will always frame the messaging and do that heavy lift and that hard work. But I think it can really accelerate you getting into a business and getting credibility rather than wheeling someone in at the very end stage of the sales cycle when something might have gone wrong. So you're building those relationships kind of very early on.
100%. I mean, the rise of Go to Network is incredible. We were doing an event about this yesterday, and I think people don't utilize their referral network enough. It's so important.
Yeah. And you know what? I think it's one of those things that you don't necessarily think about it until it happens to you. And it was probably about 2 years ago that I really started actively trying to find people that then would be connected to people in companies. Yeah. And the results of that and the way that it accelerated sales cycles to very senior people that if I was going to go to directly, just kind of paid off dividends, and I will never not do that again.
But it also and I know we want to get on to talking about being a trusted advisor. Your network referrals help you become that as well, because they are trusted by the person that they are connected with. Yeah. So they are so much more likely to have a meeting with Sarah Lapin if they have introduced them rather than you going directly. So it is just that spider web approach of really utilizing who is in your network. I mean, that's why LinkedIn is so powerful for your personal brand, your presence, but also just speaking to people, going to events. Like we do so many here at Wiser, and it's just incredible to see the amount of people, like even through this channel that I'm speaking to, that you might, you've already introduced me to Ed, who worked in your team, that I'm going to be interviewing. So it's just like, it's just nuts how you can just get so much from it. Yeah. Sarah, this is genius. Like all of this, there's so many questions that I want to get onto, but I love your point of almost playing to that subliminal of understanding what your buyer is interested in and then weaving that into your conversations, because there's so many so much competition at the moment, and having that competitive advantage is so important. And they are going to go with somebody that really speaks to their, I guess, their vision and their purpose and what they're believing. So how important is it for you to understand, you've mentioned looking at like the business case of a company and looking at their growth profile, but what are you looking for in terms of like that mission and how you tie that in the most authentic way?
I think so. There's very different levels of the sales cycle where I'm using it in different ways. I think at the stage that we're at, which is kind of that early stage point of view development and building that initial value hypothesis, going back to what you were saying, if we go back and think around the challenger sell, people only buy if you teach them something about a problem they didn't know they had and giving them a compelling reason to take action. And even though it's not simple, I think we can often overcomplicate sales. If we think about the fundamental reasons that people buy, it is very simple. They're either trying to solve the pain, or it might be a big pain, or it may be something that's going to inflict a future pain on their business and they're trying to avoid that risk. Or they're trying to run towards some future state gain, goal, or priority. So that's really what I'm trying to glean as I'm going through that. It's what are the potential areas that could be a pain for them, or what are the areas of the North Star of that business that I can again directly tie back what I do to that person. So and I'm actually doing a coaching program at the moment for enterprise sellers, and he has a really nice way of kind of visualizing this kind of process. And it's kind of thinking, when you're doing your research, you kind of think around, you build an axis. So it's your company at the bottom and the customer prospect at the top. And you're jotting down all of these different kind of priorities, and then you're creating direct links to where your company or your value is positioned to help. But then the step beyond that is you're starting to build out a bit of a narrative that then you take and you test with the different stakeholders. And again, you might get told it's a different direction, but you can start to glean different themes of when you speak to different people in terms of what the priorities of that business are. And I think jumping ahead to the trusted advisor piece, we don't have to be experts in that customer's business. We're not well positioned to be an expert over the CMO. They know that business better than you. What you're trying to find is a corner of their world, which they have a challenge with or they want to improve, that you know something about. And when you can start to articulate that you know what you're talking about because you've done your research, because you've listened to them and you've understood what challenges they're having or what outcomes they're looking to drive. And then you can start to pair it back with, okay, this reminds me of this customer that I helped, or this is a similar journey that we've been on with this customer. And you're weaving in those value stories to add credibility. And starting to make it feel a little bit more real for them that actually Sarah knows what she's talking about. And this is something that I care about. And this is interesting. So I'm going to give Sarah a little bit more of my time versus what we see a lot of the time, which is the rep that shows up and throws up, that just wants to talk about feature, function, product, demo, whatever. And it's not about the customer. And people wonder why close rates are higher or conversion rates are lower. And it's because I think, and I did a little bit of research recently, and I wanted a topic that I'm really interested to get more deeply into is the neuroscience of selling. And what it was sort of saying is we all have so much kind of emotions related to talking, and particularly talking about ourselves. And that's why you find a lot of sales reps when they're in front of a customer, the customer often doesn't get a word in edgeways.
Oh my gosh, they're just like verbal diarrhea, just telling you about their life. And you're like, when are we going to get to the point where you're helping me?
Yeah. And that is a real turn off. And I try and, I know this sounds a little bit weird. I try and understand. I've never bought software myself. I don't think I will. Maybe I will down the line be in a position that I evaluate it. So I try and listen to podcasts of things where people have bought and they'll share their like inputs or ask people actually, like when you've bought software, what are the things that account executive did that stood out, and what made you enjoy the process versus what's been a horrible process for you?
What I think is really important for people to understand, and it's actually a topic that I was speaking to somebody else about, is being a buyer is so difficult. It sucks at times. They have so much that they've got to think about, and nobody went to university to study buying. Like that's not in their job description. That is not something that they're an expert at. That is just a byproduct of the role that they're in.
Yeah.
So yes, to your point, is like understanding a little area of where their focus is and kind of seeing through into their world, but also filling those gaps of things that they're not going to know everything. Yeah. The reason they are working with a sales rep is because they're not able to do it themselves. Otherwise, they would just do it themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where there's this whole debate, and we're not going to get into it today, but it's like, is AI going to take over? But it's like, this is why salespeople still have a job in this game, because they're able to bring something to the table. And that's what sales reps need to understand, is that they can deliver that value and help fill those gaps. And with filling those gaps, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that sellers are only in the process for 18% of the time. So it's really important that when they're not there, the company is almost selling your software for you because of the business case that you've provided. So what tips do you do to make sure that their language and their tone of voice is within that business case? So when you pass it on to them, champions within the business can just do all your work for you.
You know what? This is the bit that I find the funnest in sales. Yeah. And it was actually Ed that taught me how to do this in a really, I was doing it a lot before without realizing. So prior to Salesforce, and I'm kind of going a little bit off piece here, but it's just a bit of context.
Sorry, go for it.
I had an amazing position where I was an enterprise client director, but I only had 2 clients. And it was slightly different, that my role was very much bringing consultants into the process. And the way that they were able to articulate the like a lot of what we were doing was how these businesses could change their brand perception. So a lot of what these consultants were doing was really kind of challenging from a very consultative lens how to speak about their business and building out value cases. So I actually learned how consultants think and how they tackle problems directly through that. And then when I kind of came to Salesforce, and rather than the consultants being kind of front and center of the business cases that we were writing, it was me that was doing it myself. And so I think back to what you were saying around speaking the language of the customer is so, so important. I had an amazing engagement that I worked on last year where we got ourselves into their sales kickoffs. I literally was on site with that customer all of the time. We understood exactly how they spoke internally, what their funny nuances in terms of names were, and everything that I was doing, I was really intentionally tying into the entire narrative of the story. And the way that I will articulate a business case or a vision is you tell a story. So it's the very beginning, look, this is the vision, this is where you want to get to, and tying it back to how they speak about themselves and what the priorities are that you validated with your customer are important to C-suite. And then it's playing back, okay, but this is what we've heard. So you're directly paying back their own voices to them of like, and you've told us this. And then it's like, and this is how we can change things. And you're building out this kind of future state story. So they're like, okay, this is the goal. These are the things that we know are the problems and why we can't get there. And now this is a really nice journey, and it's the kind of North Star, like where we want to get to.
And they can't disagree, because if they do, you're
it's
like,
all their language.
It's on your website. So.
Yeah, but it's actually their language of how they've spoken to you, and you've gleaned it from all of the different channels. Maybe it's their annual report, maybe it's their website, maybe it's internal documents that they've shared with you. I do a lot of workshopping, and my role in workshop is I'm directly writing quotes of things, because when I go back to them, when we're doing these readbacks, which are really deep well thought through, they take often weeks or months even to kind of really get to the crux of the problem and give you the vision of where because what we're trying to do is quite a big transformation in a lot of cases, but it is directly listening to their language and the cues and the things that are important to them, so that then we are resonating it back to them and they can hear themselves in what we're talking about.
It's so important. You mentioned the psychology of sales and everything, but I think just mirroring the language. Like if you came to pitch to Wiser, not that anybody should be listening, because my CEO will hate me if he's like now all of a sudden gets all these emails, but we are not a corporate company. Like if you email our CEO and say, dear sir, I'm not going to say his name, you can find that on LinkedIn, and if you say like, hope you're well and kind regards, that's going straight in the bin. Like we would never speak like that. So if you're turning up to a business, just like I guess how sales has evolved, you wouldn't turn up to a suit to pitch to a new startup that's a really cool tech company, just as like you probably wouldn't turn up in a hoodie to Salesforce because that's not what
a lot of people do.
I mean, yeah, but we'll see. Whoever's now turning up to interview, they're going to turn up in hoodies and they're going to be like, Sarah told us to do this. But I think that mirroring is really important. Thank you so much for giving your learnings and advice on that. It's been really interesting. But with being a trusted advisor, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into this. So we've spoken about bringing something to that buyer for them to really think, okay, I trust this person, I understand. And I think with that comes showing the value that you can bring as a seller.
Yeah.
That word value is thrown around quite a lot. So I'd love to know what's your perspective and what does value mean to you?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's so many, it's a nuanced word, isn't it? It's either a tangible ROI type value that you kind of feed in a business case, or it's a softer value in terms of, okay, maybe this company wants to become more efficient and more effective and more productive. So I think it's, again, just really, I think value comes from a couple of different things. It's teaching a customer to think about a problem in a different way than they might not have done before. I think that education piece is so critical. Whenever I go into an engagement, I always kind of think, what can I do to kind of educate this customer on something that maybe they haven't thought about before? And maybe that's talking around how we've helped a different customer. Maybe it's actually, I'm not a domain expert and I do not pretend to be a domain expert in any area, shape or form, but I do work with a lot of domain experts. So maybe we've got this brilliant director of ABM within our business. And because I sell to high-tech businesses, a lot of businesses that I work with are on their own journey to account-based marketing, but they don't necessarily know where to start. So I will pull Jo into engagements because she loves speaking to our customers around our own journey, the foundations of our program, to give kind of almost a bit of like lunch and learn, that share ideas of like what we're doing. So that in itself is valuable because you're bringing to the table something that they don't have with anyone else. We have so many domain experts across, like it's mind-blowing. And that was one of the core things that I learned working with this other customer prior to Salesforce. I remember when I took the enterprise seller role, and I'd almost been put in it before I was ready for it, but my boss had kind of seen something in me and he was like, I think you're ready, take it on. And I remember like the imposter syndrome at the time. And I was like, I've only ever done mid-market before. I've got no idea how to run an enterprise account. And again, like going back to basics, all I did was rallied an account team, a really strong account team, and met with that customer every single week. We'd go for a coffee at the local hotel near his office. And at the very beginning, it was kind of pointless meetings because it was like, hey, how are you? Like getting to know you, what's top of mind. But as we started building our relationship and as I was starting to become valuable to him, and I'd ask him every week, like, what can I do for you? Like, what's important to you? And he loved one of our consultants, Ross, because Ross just had the most groundbreaking ideas. And my client would go back to the office and clearly go up to his leadership and be like, and think about this. And he'd almost kind of pass Ross's ideas off as his own.
Such a genius.
He looked great.
Should do that more.
He looked great. But again, it's like, what is important to that customer? Value is different things to different people. I know I've just gone like really long.
No, that's so interesting.
But like, you've got to understand what is valuable to that customer. Another good example, I have a customer that loves he loves speaking opportunities. And every time I have a speaking opportunity, I'm like, put him forward. And he eats my arm off. And I'm working with his team on a strategy and I've done a load of workshops with him. But actually he's letting his team run that stuff. What he cares about is like the relationship side of things, the exposure and things like that. So it is just the basics of understanding. Like, what does Izzy care about? What's important to her? How can I make her lean in? Rather than just being another sales rep that is just trying to sell her something.
So tune in to next week where your customer is sat here in this chair because you've palmed him off to me to do a speaking opportunity. Can't wait. I think that being a trusted advisor piece though is like you said it so perfectly. It's really understanding how you can be a trusted advisor by understanding that value, and that really is the core of it. Moving on to the evolution of behaviors, you said something really interesting when we spoke before, and it's a great great analogy that salespeople are biscuit dunkers. What does that mean? And please explain. And what kind of biscuit? Are we talking a hobnob? A digestive?
You know what? I told Ed that I feel like I should tell a story here because it's just going to be confusing. So when I started working with my previous boss, Ed, he made it very clear that he didn't want a team of biscuit dunkers.
Right.
And I was like, what on earth is a biscuit dunker? I have never heard of that term before. And he was like, yeah, you know the people that just kind of show up to a meeting, they have their tea and biscuits, and then they just walk out with an order form and they've literally got no idea how they've done it.
Yeah.
And I think everyone can probably identify, there is always that one person, that one salesperson that just gets lucky every time. And they always get the good accounts. And
so annoying, we hate them.
They don't necessarily know what they've done or how they've done it. So yeah, that is the idea of a biscuit dunker, is the people that just kind of get their own luck and just do kind of quite transactional run rate selling. And I think I got taught very early from a managing director that I had a very close working relationship with. I was doing quite a transformational deal with a tobacco company of all companies. And he was literally like, don't leave pounds on the table, don't leave pounds on the table. And it's about going kind of deeper and just going deep into this customer, not just kind of going, oh, okay, I've identified that pain. That's a really good match for this. Let's just sell them that. It's about like, okay, that's one pain. Let's peel the onion back and let's see what else is going on. And actually, the more and more you do that, it takes strategy, and it often takes a team. Like, you don't necessarily as a salesperson have to do this alone, particularly when you're working in the enterprise. You will often have a kind of experts within their domains that you can bring in. But yeah, it's around going back to basics and not just kind of going into that transactional mindset, because you can see a run rate deal. And like the challenge we're in right now is every single penny matters to the business, to us as sellers. And it's kind of that short versus long-term mindset. We're on the clock every year and we have a target that we have to hit. But for me, it's just so important to take yourself out of your shoes and your company's shoes and just think about what your customer needs and what your customer wants and doing right by them. Because so often you can have the best business case in the world, but it can go up to board level and it will get rejected if you don't hit what's important to that business. So that's why this is all really, really important, particularly as you kind of go into sort of more enterprise level software.
Yeah. And on that note of every penny matters, I think it is important to squeeze as much revenue out of existing business as well as going after new logos.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it takes a team to work with, and I think also that goes internally with your teams as you're onboarding a customer and like working alongside your account management, customer success team to really make sure that they are making the best experience for that customer once they've been onboarded. And then that's ultimately going to bring more revenue for the business as they look to renew. Do you do much with the account management and CS team as you pass it over? Are you still involved in the accounts?
100%. And there's a really nice theme that's going around LinkedIn of sellers don't close deals, buyers do. And it's all centered around kind of mutual success of clients. And I think one of the challenges, and we're all kind of seeing the rise of mutual success plans. Like, every single opportunity, we have to have one. And I think they're brilliant. I think they're a great idea. But what a lot of people will do is at the point of signature, that's where the mutual success plan stops. But it's so important to think beyond that, because that point of signature is like the beginning for the customer. And that's when they're like, oh my God, this is going to happen. And we need to, like, how are you going to set us up for success? And particularly when you sell SaaS, like the ongoing relationship, it is so important that you are owning that, you've got skin in the game, that you are still deeply involved. So we will have partners that are implementing for our customers, but I will say super close. I'm on the weekly calls.
Really?
Still and you're still building a roadmap with the customer. Ultimately, if they're not successful, they're going to churn. And that's not what anyone wants. Like, the only way to grow these accounts is if you continue focusing on building the relationships. And that's also going wide and deep with your accounts. But you can only do that if you do the basics right. And it's a very stepped process. So mutual success planning is so, so important. And that goes beyond the point of signature. It's the implementation. How are we going to do QBRs with you, so the leadership team know what's going on, what our vision is, what we're thinking around, where we want the relationship to go, where we think the partnership's going, where we think we can add more value to you guys, but also keeping the business level people happy that you're actively trying to engage with them. So yeah, it's just that kind of deep collaboration across all parts, really.
And that is how you become a non-biscuit dunker, because you are doing more, you are carrying on that relationship.
You're going above and beyond.
Exactly.
And I don't think going above and beyond is that it's our job at the end of the day. I think people just, particularly, and again, going back to kind of what I was saying at the very beginning, the macroeconomic headwinds have forced some people to go back to basics and invest in relationships. I have seen it with people that work around me, because when you're in a growth environment, it is easy to let stuff like that slip. If you've got a huge pipeline and you're literally on calls and meetings and this and that and the other, it's hard to remind yourself to do all of those basics. So it's just always keeping yourself honest and always being, I guess, true and just diligent with how you approach things, because the high, when they're great, are amazing, but you also get lows. Like, sales is a squiggly career. It's a roller coaster.
100%.
And so just navigating that through being consistent, through being diligent, through being curious, through being a good listener. Like, they are the basics. They are the grounding of your, like, what the essentials you need to do. And if you can get those right, and you can get your customers to trust you, and you can add value to them, it's all key ingredients for success.
When you're going through a tough time, it is so easy to get distracted, because you're just going for gold and you're trying to move as quickly as possible. But I think from anything that you could take away from today's conversation, just stripping it back and making sure that you are doing every single touch point, that you are really understanding your buyer and making sure that you're hitting all of the marks, because they are so easily forgotten. And those are the things that will really make you from an average account executive to Sarah Lapin's level. So thank you so much. You have imparted so much knowledge today. I've learned so much. I'm sure everybody at home has as well. So thank you for coming in. But as we finish every episode on Sales Unfiltered, I want to really get to understand the unfiltered side of you and the challenges that you face and up and down. So what is one career challenge or life challenge or failure that you face that's really shaped your career to where you are today?
There are so many. You know what? I'm going to focus on a challenge. And it's been my ongoing journey to self-awareness and self-acceptance. And there are two key things that have triggered that. So again, Ed's been talked about a lot in this.
He's not even come on the channel yet. He better still come to do this interview. Otherwise, this is going to look really bad in season 2 where he doesn't turn up.
It was when I started my working relationship with him, and he made me take a Clifton Strengths test. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is a bit of nonsense. I'm just going to do it to appease him. But it's all around measuring your natural patterns for thinking, feeling, and behaving. And I remember when I got my results back, I was like, I was quite disappointed. And it was because the results of my test didn't kind of hold true to the areas that I really valued. So things like being an analytical thinker or really kind of highly strategic, because they're things that I really think are important. But I'm not a numbers person, and I never have been. And I remember Ed really kind of getting excited and like, oh my gosh, the way that you think and the way that you learn is really good, well matched to me, like where I've got strengths and you don't, like we're going to be a really good match. And I remember going back and reading the report and having this aha moment where I was like, oh my God, this is me. I'm all about relationships. My strengths lie in, like, I'm a deep empath, and that comes with its challenges in sales as well, where you feel how people feel. Like,
I'm so sorry, you don't want to buy.
But being a doer, being able to rally a team, like, they are my strengths. And I was like, oh my God, if I look at why I am where I am, that is 100% what's driven me and made me who I am. And then the secondary part happened a few months later, where I was nominated for Women in Sales. And that whole process makes you stop and you pause, and you have to think really inwardly as to who you are and where you are. And I was like, oh my God, where I am today is where I could have only dreamed to have been like 5 years ago. And it's that process of just thinking and realizing, oh my God, I've come such a long way. And these are my strengths, and I need to own them, and I need to lean in with them. And I've just been so much more intentional with the strengths that I have in my own career development and what I'm really good at, and maybe where I'm not so good. So I know where I need to put other people in. So I think any advice out there is just sit down, pause, like think about what you're really good at and lean into them as much as possible. Because again, when we go back to the pace of sales, it's never stopping and we never stop. So,
and also you never reward yourself and give yourself a pat on the back and be like, do you know what? I'm really proud of myself.
Yeah.
Well done. Well, I will say to you, I'm really proud of you. I think you've absolutely smashed it. I think self-reflection is so important. We talk about the importance of feedback from others, but actually when you give it to yourself, although that sounds really weird, and really think about the areas that you're succeeding in, but also areas that you need to develop in, and understanding your strengths, that's so powerful because only you are going to really know what's going on and be able to move yourself further in your career. So great advice, Sarah. Thank you so much. I hope everybody at home has enjoyed listening to this. I certainly have. And thank you so much and best of luck for the future. Can't wait to see where you go.
Thank you. It's been an honour.
Thanks so much for listening. Check out the channel for more episodes like this one, and we'll see you next week.